Okay, let's focus a bit on Kosovo and Serbia, because you were introduced into this subject the hard way, entering the war, and you were very sensitive to these issues. You were very knowledgeable and went to actually villages that other people did not go during the war. You were here consistently and gave the real picture of what was happening. And Austria, with Albert Rohan and with yourself, was very highly represented in the international diplomacy, and your presence in Rambouillet was very well perceived by all parties, especially by the Kosovar delegation. At one point, you were involved in something that looked very shady, which was the land swap. What actually happened?
That's quite a question, because I still remember at a time when I was one of the few to actually voice some sort of a nod. Why not talk about partition? Yeah, I was really heavily criticized for this. And so I was in a way then in this kind of explanation mode. Yeah? And maybe it will need a couple of minutes to explain this, because I think this is very important, how my thinking went at the time. And of course, you remember that it was Mogherini then in charge of foreign policy, in charge of the European Union, which obviously had sort of launched this idea, you know, and Hashim Thaçi.
Was it the parties themselves or Mogherini? Was it Thaçi and Vučić, or it was Mogherini?
Well, this I actually do not know. I think it was this was always a Serb idea. Yeah?
Yeah.
I think that was really came from Belgrade as an idea. And Thaçi was obviously open to it, and obviously also Mogherini. Yeah. And when I heard this, I thought, oh, it's a bad idea. But it would be the first time that I can remember that two heads of state or government in the Balkans would try to talk about borders in a peaceful way, in a diplomatic, in a political way, and not fight it out on the Kosovo Polje or any place. Yeah. So my thinking at the time was actually, it's unrealistic to believe that there is going to be a compromise, a territorial compromise hammered out. However, once you talk about it, and once both sides realize it's too difficult, let's find another solution to this, then we would be on the right way, that both sides would have a responsibility to be successful. And then you could say there is not a division, a territorial division, but we find a solution where people on both sides of the border can live a better life, economically, easier crossing the borders. Actually, the European idea, so to speak.
Even your personal life, because you are a Slovene, ethnic Slovene in Austria, right?
Yes, yeah. For me, clearly, this thinking was, I remember in times of Cold War, of course, as a young kid, I remember going to Yugoslavia was always very difficult, you know, psychologically. What is that, the communists and here, and they might, when things were happening at the border and so on. And then when this all was over, all of a sudden we were all friends and we crossed back and forth, you know. So this kind of feeling, it was more a feeling that I had, could also happen here. And of course, we had also Austria. We have Alto Adige, South Tyrol. Sure. Yeah, I mean, South Tyrol, for many, many generations, that was a huge problem. Yeah, starting World War I. Yeah, 1918,
Sure.
there was the division. And then in the 1970s, so it took a very, very long time, but it eventually worked out.
Yes.
And of course, there were also plans to swap or to reintegrate Alto Adige or the South Tyrol into Austria, and all this. And there were even population transfer. I mean, during Hitler and Mussolini, German-speaking from Italians, they were resettled in Germany. I remember also from one part in Italy. I was actually in a family. My mother wasn't married at the time, and so there was a lady from Italy, German-speaking lady, who was my nanny at the time. I grew up with her. I still remember her with a lot of fondness. I saw what this kind of division can produce, and how, if turned in a positive way, things can then add to a better life.
And so how did this work out?
I even suggested to the Austrian president van der Bellen at the time, when we have in the Tyrol, in Alpbach, there is an annual
meeting,
summer European conference, and he invited Vučić and Thaci to this conference, and it was the first time that the two were on the same stage.
When they said we are not problematic guys, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we had dinner together,
Okay.
And I felt somehow that this is actually what my thinking was behind this partition idea. Actually, they get to know each other better, and they also see the limits of what can be achieved, and then you move on from there.
Did you sit on maps?
No, it was not. That was, of course, not the case. But of course, I had this. I saw these unrealistic ambitions in Belgrade. I thought this could never work. So, but that was really my idea. It would not work, but they have at least tried.
And the idea was to get, what, 10 times more territory?
Well, I mean, the Serbs, of course, thought they could get much more than they would give. I mean, this is okay, but it can't work. It cannot work, but you can have a wish, of course, but it's wishful thinking, not reality. But for me, it was important also from yet another angle. Immediately when this partition idea came up, it was absolutely criticized that, no, this is a no-go. Why is this a no-go? Are we the ones to decide what two politicians from neighboring countries will maybe eventually decide? It's not up to us.
But then this idea went from Europe to the United States, right?
Yes. It's true. Of course, I mean, partition is not such an original idea. You think, okay, why not? I have heard this in Bosnia many times. That, I mean, Serbs cannot live together, so therefore, with the Bosniaks, so therefore, just basically, And of course, I mean, our ambition at the time was that we need to find a way so they can live together. Yeah. But when they talk about it and when they agree on something, then it's up to them, because, first of all, Thaci probably thought, well, if there is some sort of agreement with Belgrade, it's only possible if Belgrade recognizes Kosovo, because you cannot sign an international treaty without being recognized as a state. Yeah, so it would be an indirect recognition of Kosovo if eventually something would have happened to this effect, And my ideas already went much farther. I said, what about if there's no partition? Why not? Why don't you create some sort of a joint venture across the border, which exists in quite a few other circumstances and between countries, a free trade zone, or you have some mining enterprises there. Why not have a joint enterprise of course, I mean, it sounds a bit utopian, but again, this is actually what politics needs to do, think out of the box, try out new ideas. If you are stuck in one idea and you say only either or, you cannot really reach any satisfactory compromise. So therefore, talking about possibilities, options, ideas is already sort of loosening up the situation.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's actually what was behind, as I've spoken now quite long. I thought this is an entry into direct engagement between the two politicians.